Hello, everyone. It's Saturday, January 5th, 2019, and we welcome you to our Bible study. We are recording today from the Plainfield Christian Science Church, Independent, Plainfield, New Jersey, the United States of America. And we welcome you all. And our moderator for today is Thomas from New York.
Welcome, this is Thomas. So our topic today is Daniel and the Lion's Den. And before we start out, we have a text here I found from an article written by J.R. Mosley. He wrote, "To the editor of the Macon Evening News, Christian Science in no sense discredits the plain teachings of the Bible, and it clearly recognizes that the Christ way of dealing with the devil in all his works, sin, disease, and death, is the only way. It only discredits the theories and opinions of men which have departed from the whole salvation, which it promises and which is realized through a right understanding and a right relationship to Christ, who is the same yesterday and today and forever. The Bible, to the Christian Scientist, is not only the good book, but also the health book and the life book. And Christ is not only the Savior of men, but also their ever-present physician, helper, and friend."
Excellent.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Thank you.
So if anybody's wondering about the title here, Christian Science versus the Devil, I mean, this was J.R. Mosley was a member of the Macon, Georgia Christian Science Church, and there was some pastor in Macon that was wrote a letter about Christian Science in the local newspaper. So he just responded to that, and then later it was published in the Christian Science Sentinel.
Excellent.
So in 1901.
Wow.
Okay.
That sure shows the importance of the Bible, no question about it. And of course, Mrs. Eddy approved all of what was put in those sentinels and journals at that time. I love that, too, that Christ is not only the Savior of men, but an ever-present physician, helper, and friend. So we should go to him if we think we need a doctor. Go to the Christ. What does he say? Any comments?
Well, and this is why Christian Science is so invaluable, because it makes the teachings of Jesus 100% practical and relevant today. Whereas you see so many, or you hear so many other so-called religions with theories that somehow limit Jesus' teaching and practice to only his experience or only the experience of maybe some of his disciples or apostles, or maybe some ancient time only. But that's not true. What he taught and practiced is 100% relevant today because it's based on the science that governs the universe.
Well, and if it's the only way, then it's the only way all the time. There's no other way.
Exactly. That's why we can be so grateful for Mary Baker Eddy for keeping us, putting us back on the straight and narrow.
I like the
So
help.
any other comments about this?
Yeah, Florence was just about to give one.
No, I was just saying I love the helper and friend part because sometimes the loneliness or I don't have somebody, all that. I think it to bring it very practical.
Yes.
Think of God.
Ever present.
Yep. What did Mrs. Eddy say once when asked about that? Something often alone but never lonely.
Yeah. And if you would spend your time thinking of that the Christ was with you and to feel that presence and power with you, physician, friend, helper, rather than spending your time thinking, oh, I'm alone and look at Janie Smith, she's got such a big family and I don't have anybody. Where it's the scale. Where is your thought? What are you spending time thinking? If you think, you're lonely and you're not Janie Smith, then you'll put yourself in that position. But if you spend your time rejoicing that the Christ is ever present, you'll find yourself as happy as Janie Smith and maybe far, far happier.
Maybe much happier.
Most likely.
Oh, yes.
Yes, because whether you've got a lot of friends and family, we all have to come to this point that we are alone with God and our being. We all have to come to that. Sooner or later, in some way or another. So why not now?
Very grateful that this person pointed out that the only thing that Christian Science discredits is the theories and opinions that have departed from the true way. Christian Science, of course, was a divine revelation. So it was pure, good, mixed up with all those theories and opinions.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. So as I said, our topic today is Daniel and the Lion's Den. So since this is a Bible study, I'm sure this topic feels like it's a Bible study or something we remember reading as a child, or maybe it was read to us. But, this is the Plainfield Church Bible study. So this is very serious stuff, and we're going to learn some really good things, I'm sure, from this discussion. So,
Okay, now that we're all in the right frame of mind.
but we can have fun doing this. So I want to read just briefly from the Hebrews in the text was given. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained a good report. And the writer of the Hebrews went on to talk about the men of faith, people of faith in the Bible. And I thought it was interesting in here. He talks about what the people of faith did, and says in here, stop the mouths of lions.
Yeah. Wonderful.
So, our first question is, Belshazzar was king of the Chaldeans. Which prophet was from Chaldea?
I believe it was Abraham, then Abram, who I believe it's in chapter Genesis 11, went from Ur of the Chaldees to Canaan with his father and his wife and Lot.
That's right. Yeah. So that's mentioned in Genesis, also in Acts 7. It says to Stephen, he said that Abraham came from Mesopotamia, the land of the Chaldeans.
So the king.
I read what the name Chaldean means as demons or as robbers. Not too good. And today they live in Iraq, East Syria, and southeast Turkey. And they ruled the empire called Babylon. And I read that they are and were Babylonians. I don't know if anyone else read that, but I guess they weren't. They were very similar.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different views as to what all this means, because it's so long ago. But Chaldea, was in southern Iraq or southern Babylon, and it's a very ancient civilization, and the people there were very educated. And so it could be that the rulers of Babylon were from Chaldea, and they were the very educated, wise people ran the kingdom. Chaldeans has also been used as a term for other things like wise men or astrologers and diviners and things like that. So it's, yeah. Even magician, so.
One of the things that I read about that king was he was the last king of Babylon, and he fell to his pride and idolatry, and that's when the great Cyrus took over the Medes. All this was predicted by Isaiah, and Cyrus ended up being the one, I believe, that restored Judah, but this is also the same time that King Darius, who was a Mede, took over, which was also in the prophecy that the Mede would rule first. And I thought that was very interesting in context. And what I loved about this, what I think I found was when Daniel did his prayer in chapter 9, I think it's around 10, but they start talking about Cyrus and him restoring Judah. And so to me, it's the profound impact that Daniel made through all this time. He served under all these kings, but what he did was uplift and kept the Spirit of God, Christ, going until it was restored. And he worked under these people, and he had influence over them in different ways. And so to me, it was very encouraging.
It definitely, thank you. That's very inspiring, yes. One with God is the majority, so it doesn't matter how bad your circumstance seems to be. You can lift the whole thing up. You're right yourself, instead of going down to that level.
Great, thanks. So question 2. What languages were used in writing the book of Daniel?
I read that there were 2 different languages. From Daniel 1 until Daniel 2, verse 3 was written in Hebrew. Then Daniel 2, verse 4 through Daniel 7 was Aramaic. It was the language of the Babylonians. Then Daniel 8 through 12 was in Hebrew. The focus of these last 5 chapters is primarily on Israel.
Yeah, I find that fascinating. I always thought of the New Testament as written in Greek and the Old Testament as written in Hebrew.
Yeah, I when I first read the question, I thought it was going to be the least interesting question of the bunch. But when I started looking into it, I don't know, it was interesting. I like thinking about these people in their day-to-day, what they had to do, how they were going, and the thought that, he wrote some in Aramaic so that the people there could get it, some in Hebrew that was really kind of meant for the Israelites. So it was very interesting to me. Thank you.
Aramaic is also known as a lingua franca. It's kind of an interesting language.
So who wrote the book of Daniel?
That's a good question.
Or maybe it was compiled at more than one author?
It could be. I mean, there's a lot of views on this. I'll run through sort of something I read that I thought was fascinating, kind of about when was the book of Daniel written. You read that there's a lot of scholars who feel that the book of Daniel was written around this roughly, but was written a couple centuries before Jesus. And this one article was talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls. So it goes through here and says that in the Dead Sea Scrolls there's 13 fragments from Psalms, 9 from Exodus, 8 from Deuteronomy, 5 from Leviticus, 4 from Genesis, and 4 from Isaiah. Now it also says it had some fragments from Daniel, and it said nothing in anything they read in the Dead Sea Scrolls indicated that they treated Daniel as some sort of recent publication, that it was treated as scripture. Well, they have at least 8 fragments from Daniel, so this is as much or more than other books of the Bible. So pretty much, says that it would not have, what they were saying was it would not have been written close to the time of Jesus, and then the Essenes treated it as scripture when it was just written when they were around, which is kind of, doesn't make sense, kind of what he was saying. So I'm not sure what the answer is, but people are all over the map on this. I mean, when we're talking about the languages, people have studied the Aramaic using Daniel, and they've found some things in there. They say that the Aramaic that was used is a very ancient Aramaic and not something that's more recent during Jesus' time.
I read that Daniel originated as a collection of Aramaic court tales. So that was interesting to me.
Well, I guess the most important thing is it's a tremendous story, and there's so many lessons to it, and it's a true story. And thank God for all those who did put it together. I always thought Daniel wrote it, but I guess it doesn't matter. God wrote it. It's for us now.
Somebody inspired wrote it, I guess.
Yeah. Someone hearing God's voice. It's very specific, too. It's not like it's general.
I think it all indicates, the hand of God is on all of this, because the scholastic people tried to put it all together. It's all pieces and fragments, not only pieces of text, but spanning various time periods as well, and yet we have a complete book. The way I see it, God's hand is on this. He intended it for it to be in His scriptures. He found the way. May not know the specifics of how it came together, but it did.
They say that the book of Daniel was the first to mention Gabriel and Michael.
That's interesting.
Really?
And I think Gabriel was mentioned in his prayer in chapter 9, when he was praying for his country, and Gabriel came to him. And I do know sometimes the challenge is to who wrote it, what's operating is to discredit.
Yes, that's what I feel, too. So, and it can get very intellectual. You get off the beaten path of what is really important.
Well, there are legitimate questions as to who exactly wrote a lot of pieces in the Bible, but that doesn't diminish the value of what was written. The fact that people wrote these stories so long ago is testament to how important these stories were to the people at the time, how profound these experiences were to people at the time. They wrote them down so that nobody would ever forget them.
In Daniel 9, it's written, starting with line 22, and he informed me, it starts with 21. Yea, whilst I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation. And he informed me and talked with me and said, O Daniel, I am now come forth to give you skill and understanding. And then it goes on to tell him what's going to happen.
Well, it shows that Daniel was so close to God that they could find no fault with him. And in that closeness, he heard God's voice so clearly. He experienced angels. And I think it's quite remarkable. We can bring it home, ask ourselves, if we were researched, could we be found without fault? They couldn't find one thing wrong with him. I love what Spurgeon says when considering Daniel's integrity. Spurgeon bemoaned our modern compromises. This is a quote from him. As for Lord Fair Speech, Lord Time Server, Mr. Smooth Man, Mr. Anything, Mr. Facing Both Ways, Mr. Two Tongues, and all the members of their club, Mr. By Ends included, the entire company of them will be swept away when the judge comes with the besom of destruction. And so he puts it all in its place. We have Daniel who stands pure and upright and without fault. And because of that, he could experience the visitations of angels and stand before hungry lions and not be harmed. But you see, it didn't just happen. It was not just all of a sudden he was to do all this. He lived it every single day. So I think we should go on, or we won't have time for the more meaty questions.
Oh, yes. So, but we've been talking about some great stuff. So, number 3, this is a bit of a quick question, but I thought it was interesting to think about this in a way that sometimes things happen in our life and we have no idea kind of what it means, but actually they may be rather important. So, how could the sealing of the mouth of the den have been a protection for Daniel? Remember, the king put a seal on there, and all the other princes or whatever they were called put their seals too. So everybody put their seal on there.
Well, it says that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel. Maybe someone would have gone in and stirred up the lion or whatever.
Thank you, yeah.
You consider the trickery that got Daniel in the lion's den in the first place. If those people would have had access during the night, who knows what they would have done.
Yeah, he had a lot of enemies. Oh.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thanks. So, okay. Yes, go ahead.
Well, I was thinking that it really would prove that only God saved him and nothing else. It made me think of the tomb where Jesus was sealed up and they were guarded, the guards guarded outside so that they knew that nothing else happened but that God did this.
That's a good point. Thank you.
Good point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the next question is, what truths did Darius tell us? I thought this was fascinating because, a lot of times I just think, maybe I'm just being laziness, but I'm going to hear truths when I hear someone like John the Apostle say something, or Isaiah or something. But here Darius is telling us something, and I think he told us some very good things.
Carol,
so what are some of those?
How do you say Darius? It's Darius. Okay.
Oh, thank you. I don't know how to say it. Darius.
No,
okay.
we're all saying. So thank you, Carol.
Darius.
She read the Bible. She studied those things.
Well, thank you.
He sent out the word that that Daniel's God is the true God, and he wrote this to all people, nations, and languages.
Well, and when he realized he'd been taken for a ride and had condemned Daniel to the lion's den, he told Daniel that thy God, whom thou servest continually, shall deliver thee from the lion's mouth. He didn't ask him, or he didn't say, I hope. He said he would.
And he, go ahead. And he declared that Daniel was innocent.
And you know, he had the humility. It said he was sore displeased with himself. It was like, oh my gosh, that aha moment, as they say. Because what these men who conspired against Daniel, what did they appeal to in Darius?
His pride?
Yes.
That he was the king.
Yes. This is why you have to be so careful. It's smooth-tongued villainy. They could find no fault with Daniel, so they had to figure trickery to get it going. And so they had this whole plot going, and it wasn't to just build up Darius at all. It was to get to Daniel. And so Darius had that, oh my gosh, what an idiot I've been. Now, he wasn't so prideful that I didn't make any mistake. It was all blah, blah, blah. He humbled himself before God, which showed what a good man he was and is, that type of thought. So there's a lot that led up to before he declared all of this other stuff. And then he said he set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Now, with that humble prayer going on, you know very well that I'm sure it aided Daniel in his victory over the lions. Can you imagine making that kind of mistake, but then humbling yourself before God and admitting it, and then laboring all night long? It told me something else, too. Daniel wasn't just in there for a couple hours. He was with those lions all night, and they were hungry. And that was a good point Dale made, that no one could get in there, because maybe, you could say if it hadn't been sealed off, well, maybe someone went out and got some meat and threw it. Who knows what stories they could have made up. But it was only the working of God that protected Daniel. But Darius was quite a wonderful character in this story. And then, yes, he did say, thy God whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. He had no other choice but to leave it in God's hands.
In the Jewish website that I went to, they said the only thing that they could do to get Daniel was to accuse him of treason.
Yes. I read something I thought interesting by McLaren. He said, the world may not know the details of doctrines or the intimacies of worship with God, but they can tell a bad temper, selfishness, conceitedness, or dishonesty when they see it. The world is a very poor critic of my Christianity, but it is very sufficient on my conduct. So you think about that. That's what Gary talks about. It might be the only sermon anyone ever listens to. They might know nothing about your religion, nor do they want to know anything about Christian Science, but they will be watching your conduct. Are you honest? Are you humble? Are you loving? Do you obey God? And Daniel did all those things. And the other thing, the smooth-tongued villainy of these people out to get Daniel, was they said that everybody approved of this.
Well.
And you know, people do that. We've learned about Hitler. Hitler made it sound like, oh, everybody's Nazi. Everybody approves of this. It's all, yeah. Well, that's a darn lie. Not everybody approved of this. Most of those people, I don't think, even knew about it. And Daniel, who was one of the officers, he didn't know about conspiracy. So that was a darn lie to get everybody to think, oh, it's just, you know, a shoo-in, and everybody believed it, so you should believe it too. They're lies.
The whole thing was conspired from the beginning. They also fell upon this so-called law of Medes and Persians to say, if the king signs something, it cannot be changed. So they had so badly manipulated the king itself that after he had signed it, they threw this law on Medes and Persians thing at him and says, hey, you signed it, and there's no way you can go back on it. Very manipulative.
Yes. And then this is another Spurgeon, where therefore King Darius signed the written decree. And then a quote, suppose the law of the land were proclaimed, no man shall pray during the remainder of this month on pain of being cast into a den of lions. How many of you would pray? I think there would be rather a scanty number at the prayer meeting.
Yeah, but you can pray silently.
Yes. But he says, not but what the attendance at prayer meetings is scanty enough now. But if there were the penalty of being cast into a den of lions, I'm afraid the prayer meeting would be postponed for a month, owing to pressing business and manifold engagements of one kind or another.
Well, that sounds good to me. All we did is just reschedule the prayer.
We'll just put it off a month till this decree is over. Well, well, yeah, you can absolutely pray silently, but Daniel had the guts to pray, you know, with the windows open and everybody seeing exactly what he was doing.
And his face was toward Jerusalem.
Yeah, face toward Jerusalem, because that's how he had been instructed, and he felt that was a righteous thing. But he didn't stop what he was doing or change it in any way.
That really struck me, too, that shows you how well grounded he was in God. And that's what we have to do.
Absolutely. It's how well grounded you are. That's why on the forum I wrote about praying in the morning about the omnipotence, omnipresence, and omniscience of God, to ground yourself in the allness of God. So then, if someone tells you you're going to be thrown into a den of lions, you say, okay, whatever. But you have that sense of trust in God.
Well, you can say, my God will be there. So
yes. Daniel knew, without a question, that the safest thing to do always is what?
Put God first.
Obedience to Him. That's your safe position. This waffling around is not safe. You
can't straddle the fence.
Nope, you'll fall off. He knew his safety was in his obedience to God, and he did not doubt it. But he had been praying 3 times a day for a long time, forever.
Well, it's a good question to ask ourselves, isn't it? What are our priorities? How firmly am I grounded in my first priority? Or do I make exceptions to my first priority and give priority to a lot of other things when they come up? How faithful am I in attending church? How faithful am I in doing the things that God has for me to do?
I think faithful and also with faith. I mean, we do it, but do we have faith in it? You faithfully attend service, you faithfully pray, but do you have faith in the prayer also?
Yeah, I read a commentary said, it isn't hard to see why people are men pleasers. It seems as if people have the power to hire or fire us, to break our hearts, to slander us, to make our lives generally miserable. The power to obey God and stand for Him comes from a settled understanding that God is really in control. And that's where the faith comes. Because if your faith is in people, that all these people, they have power over you, then you are denying, what are you denying?
God's omnipotence.
Yes, God's omnipotence. And here we go. You've deviated from the first commandment. Right there, you do it. And that includes all kinds of things. Doctors' verdicts, people scaring you, a boss, all kinds of things where you think they have the control over you, rather than omnipotence, God. Okay, Tom.
So on the omnipotence, so I think we're really talking about Daniel and praying, but just to say something about Darius, and omnipotence, he said that God is a living God. God is steadfast forever. God's kingdom shall never be destroyed. God's dominion is forever. And God delivers and rescues. That's pretty clear.
Darius said all that.
No, Daniel.
Verses 26 and 27.
Yeah, Darius.
Darius. Oh, okay.
You look at 26, 27. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel.
Right.
Yeah, going on record before the whole world is a pretty big thing.
Yeah, it was quite evident. And you see, this is what Daniel's example had done to Darius. It changed him from, I'm sure, someone who didn't believe, to someone who did, who had faith in God. Daniel's example. And, once again, all of this got started with this who shall be greatest stuff, isn't it? It was the envy. Envy, that's why it is so dangerous. It's why I bring it up so often. You watch it in yourself. Who will be greatest? And then you start looking at others or whatever. It leads to bad things. And the person that's envious is the one that's going to suffer.
Yeah, they kind of suffered, didn't they? Did someone want to tell about how those people who plotted against Daniel suffered? Think about it. Because Daniel was like among the top 3, and then he became the top 1, and that just bothered them,
Yeah, what happened to them?
They got fed to the lions.
Them and their children and their wives.
Everybody. And the lions who had refrained from attacking Daniel had no problem attacking them.
Yeah, how did the lions treat those people?
Did it crush their bones?
They were a good meal.
And ever they came at the bottom of the den. Which I thought was the nicest way of saying that.
What was that they hadn't even gotten there yet, right?
No, that's after the lions ate them. That's what happened to them. They were pooped out.
Oh, I hadn't thought about it that way, but that's interesting. But I had thought about that, there was no, being down there with the lions and kind of putting them off for a while. There was, it was pretty quick.
It's very interesting because
I've been thinking the whole time how here Darius was a dictator, in essence, and yet he couldn't back off on a mistake he made. And then Mrs. Singletary put, I realize I do the same thing when I let the common knowledge around me, which is false, affect the way I'm thinking. But to contrast it, we take a look at Mary Baker Eddy, who, if she made a quote-unquote mistake or took a wrong step, she would retrace it and do the right step, or she would she would back off and let the students make the mistakes that they were so wanting to do, and she was warning them against it, and then she would give in, like so, the church property and things. And then once they went through the error and saw that she was right and they were wrong, then she helped clean everything up again. So it's just an amazing contrast of how to rule when God is with you.
Thank you very much. That's the tares in the wheat growing up. And if you try to intervene and people don't learn the lesson, sometimes it's very hard not to speak up when you see where they're headed and what the result's going to be. And you can speak up. You can tell of the foe in ambush. You really need to. But then they've got to learn their lesson. They have to learn their lesson.
And that's why it's so essential to be able to admit a mistake.
That is it. There you go. There's the humility.
And the sooner the better. When you admit it, then you can learn from it and go higher. Clears the atmosphere. People around you feel better about it. They respect you for it. When you can't admit the mistake, it just continues to eat at you.
That's such an important point. When you can admit it truly, it's like the atmosphere clears. And that's why Bignell Young said the good person is the hardest one to heal, because the good person will never admit they've made a mistake. They have this facade. I'm too good. I did not do it. I mean, Darius could have been that way. I'm the king. How could I make a mistake? It had to be right. He could have, but he immediately realized what he did, and the atmosphere cleared. Everything was good. He got on his knees. He prayed to God on Daniel's behalf and on his own behalf, and progress was made. But when you can't say you made a mistake because you think you're so good or so perfect, that problem goes on and on and on, and you've built a barrier, and God can't reach you, nor can a practitioner. I was one that was very much like that, so I know. And I know how it felt when I could really say, oh my gosh, what did I do? And honestly, there's just such a sense of peace comes over you. It's what Florence spoke to in her testimony Wednesday night, the peace that humility brings. Otherwise, you're running scared.
And in the wrong direction.
And in the wrong direction and in the wrong mind. So are we done with Uriah?
Okay, so the last question, which we've already been talking about, which is good because that's kind of the theme of all this is prayer. So how did Daniel pray? Give examples from the book of Daniel, and so give one example. See Daniel, chapter 9, verse 3. I set my face unto the Lord. That really stood out to me because of the intensity of how Daniel prayed, you know. Nothing, when you read that, it's like nothing else meant anything to him other than God, you know. I set my face unto the Lord God.
And he gave thanks.
Thank you. That's very important.
Mm-hmm.
Because often if you're in a terrible problem, I mean, if you're being thrown in a den of lions, you might not be thinking about giving thanks. You might be thinking, good God, what's going on? But he didn't. He recounted his blessings, praised God, he gave thanks.
And I think Tom, said it correctly when he was just a minute ago. Daniel's relationship with God was the only thing that mattered to him. It was the only thing that mattered to him. So when he prayed to God, it was one-to-one, and he didn't let anything get in the way of that relationship. Not even the king's decree. Not even the threat to his life. Nothing got in the way of his relationship with God. And it wasn't a one-time thing. It was every day of his life.
Three times a day.
3 times. Oh, sorry.
3 times a day.
No, we're saying the same thing, 3 times a day.
3 times a day. And, you supposedly eat 3 meals a day to nourish yourself. Well, you need to nourish your soul. And that sweet story, Mrs. Eddy, when she was a little girl and heard of this story, she began praying, I believe it was 7 times a day. And it said he prayed in his house. And one of the, I think it was Matthew Henry, said sometimes alone, sometimes with his family around him. He wasn't ashamed. I mean, you do get in your closet and pray quietly, but he also wasn't ashamed to let his family members know he was a man of prayer. Are you ashamed of that? And then Matthew Henry, says that every house should be a house of prayer. Is your house? You really have talked about claiming the presence of Michael and Gabriel in your home, in every room of your home. But if your house is not a house of prayer, you can't really claim that. Your home should have a spiritual atmosphere about it, because you have learned to pray as Daniel did. And I think it started, he had heard in the book of Jeremiah, the Babylonian captivity, this was a prophecy, would last 70 years. And that's when he fell on his knees and began to intercede for his people. When we hear some awful thing that's going to happen or is happening, do we fall on our knees to intercede, to pray that things will change or be better? That I think I told you about the book. Shardy's mentioned it too. Standing in the gap for your children. When you see them going the wrong direction, to intercede, to pray for them, that they will hear God's voice. They will obey God. They will do His will, not what you want for them, but they will fulfill God's purpose for them. These prayers and the way that Daniel did pray have tremendous power. Not because God has changed, but because of what? You have changed. You have changed. You've aligned yourself up with this titanic power, the omnipotence, omnipresence, and omniscience of God. You have lined yourself up. And if you are living it day by day, that power just pours down on you. If you're not, if you're sinning here and there and everywhere, well, then the results won't be so great. There's no room for hypocrisy in this. And God knows all. So He knows you can't try to fool Him.
There was something quite significant to me anyways, when I read into chapter 10, Daniel 10, it says Daniel was mourning and fasting 3 full weeks. On the 24th day, as he was by the river Hiddekel, he saw a great vision and heard O Daniel, a man greatly beloved, understand the words that I speak unto thee, and stand upright. Fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that thou didst set thine heart to understand, and to chasten thyself before thy God, thy words were heard, and I am come for thy words. And in Science and Health, Mrs. Eddy has the definition of Hiddekel, the river, divine science understood and acknowledged.
Thank you. Spurgeon says that night of Daniel in the lion's den, he says, in any case, he must have had a glorious night. But with the lions and all the angels all night to keep him company, he was spending the night watchers in grander style than Darius. That's a great way to look at it. And then also to Fairley's point about prayer having thanksgiving and praise, Spurgeon says, prayer and praise should always go up to heaven arm in arm, like twin angels walking up Jacob's ladder, or like kindred aspirations soaring up to the Most High. Praise and thanksgiving must accompany prayer. You can't pray without that to be an effective prayer. Otherwise, you're bringing all your doubt and worry and everything into the prayer.
It emphasizes the omnipotence that you're talking about.
Yes.
I like that. Daniel, he didn't have to change tactics. Prayer got him into that lion's den, and then prayer got him out.
Yeah.
I think that's really, it shows how practical it is.
That's great. That's wonderful. Well, and it shows, we must, this is why the Bible tells us to walk circumspectly, because the wicked always try to blame the innocent, especially if they feel like they're being cornered and they're going to be found out. Part of the deflection, they will use any tactic they can. It's actually quite unbelievable. But you see, I think it's Matthew Henry says that this story illustrates the guilty were punished in place of the innocent, and also it illustrates a principle of spiritual warfare. God will cause our enemy to be impaled on the same snare set for us. Whoops.
That's what happened in Esther. I think it was the guy's name.
That's right.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, he built a gallows for somebody else to get hanged, and guess where he ended up?
Thank you.
He
Good.
hanged up.
There you go.
And the same thing with these people in Daniel, because of their envy and desire to be the top spot, where they end up at the bottom of the lion's den. That's where this envy got them.
And how foolish was that? They were still in the king's court. They weren't living in a hovel somewhere, The fact that they just needed to get one rung higher was... I'm sure they would have undone Darius, too, if they could.
Well, you see, it was materialism in them. It was the false beliefs in them that were rebuked by Daniel's purity. They were handled by animal magnetism. And they didn't know what to do about it. So they blamed. They blamed Daniel. Same way the Pharisees and the scribes, who were rebuked by Jesus' purity, didn't look inside and realize they needed to change their false beliefs. No, they blamed the messenger and tried to get rid of the messenger. Daniel happened to be the most Christ-like thought on earth at the time. So every false belief at the time was rebuked by his purity.
So this is why it's so important we know the Bible and know these stories, because they're so important to us today. And in the Bible, it tells you, Mrs. Eddy calls it the human mind. The Bible talks about the carnal mind. And it's the same thing. And it lists what it is. And it says it's an abomination to God. Certainly one of them is envy. So if you think any good can come of you ever being envious of anyone, you're sadly mistaken.
It just hurts you. It doesn't hurt the other person.
Yes. And I think we might read from it tomorrow, I'll see. But in Martha Wilcox, I'm not even sure which article it is, but she talks about the reciprocal law of being. And that was a life changer for me, because she says, and I've often said it, if Daniel had hated those who conspired against us, even been mad at Darius for making this stupid law up, what would have happened to him?
He would have been eaten.
Yes, he would have been eaten. Remember this when you were put into a difficult situation. Do not hate your conspirators. That will be your bridge where animal magnetism will reach you, and you will be eaten. This is one of the highest tests to ever go through. Not to hate, especially when you're innocent, you haven't done anything wrong, and you get accused of things. You're like, where the heck did that come from? You do not hate. And even, when he was released, Daniel was released from the den, the first thing he said to Darius was, "Live forever, O king." He blessed everybody. He was in good spirits, happy. He wasn't hating. I don't care how severe your situation is. Do not hate.
Well, Jesus is a perfect example of that. I mean, being nailed to the cross and the situation he was in, I mean, we could say he should have hated them. He should have done anything he could have to stop that. But he loved to the end.
Forgive them, for they know not what they do.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
And that's why Jesus warned us in the Sermon on the Mount, where he said, "Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets which were before you." He's warning us. It's going to happen. So don't get down in the mud and hate when you get persecuted and reviled falsely for Christ's sake.
Here's another way to look at it. This is from Matthew Henry, commentary for Psalms 50:50. Our troubles must drive us towards God, not drive us away.
Thank you.
I have to say, too, that the examples that Jesus gave us and Mrs. Eddy and Plainfield, you are a perfect example of not hating but loving, which brought you right out of that manipulation by the Mother Church or the abomination or whatever you want to call it. And look at how you are thriving.
Thank you. Exactly.
And Eustace was an example too. If you read the beginning of this, he did not hate, and he rebuked anyone who even suggested to him that he should. That's why I'm not really in favor of law doing that kind of thing. Not saying you should never do it, but it's hard to think of an example where perhaps you should, where you go after somebody. There might be times when it's appropriate, but you have to be very careful as a scientist. Say, of course, Mrs. Eddy also was an example with Woodbury. time and time again. She loved instead of hated.
She invited her to her house, expecting that the love that she would express to Woodbury would melt away this evil.
And in doing so, you were lifted up higher, and you will be lifted up out of the situation. While if you hate, you will be dragged into the fight of peace, which is what the temptation.
But I think you're completely correct about the lawsuits, because when that lawsuit went between the board and the publishing house, if I understand it correctly, the judge ruled that the publishing house's view was correct, but it still ruled in favor of the board. So that's what happens when you go into the material laws.
Well, yeah, and that litigation was a good example of the workings of animal magnetism within the so-called Christian Science movement. Because the board of directors went around the court to get control of the publishing, in spite of the court actually ruling in favor of publishing.
Thank you.
It was total wickedness.
Spiritual wickedness in high places. And to Tom's point, what Tom read about how these experiences should push us toward God, not away from Him. The ploy of so-called devil is to get you to think, there's no God. Look what's happened to me. God is doing this. That is what it really wants you. Then it's got you. But if it pushes you toward God, wonderful. But many times, and we hear it in the practice, it's complaining and hatred toward God, that God did this. God never did anything.
Or why did God allow it?
Why did God allow it? God did not. It was a lack of God. It was a lack of God. Never God. It's always a lack of God. You've got to understand that. And even with Darius, when he made his mistake, he blamed no one but himself. He didn't even blame the other people for tricking him. He blamed himself. He took responsibility. And because of that, I'm sure his prayers were mighty.
When you have a problem, always say, what can I learn from this?
Yes.
Demand the blessing.
The blessing.
So, yes. So even today we have examples of being able to demand the blessing by rising above the attack of evil, the attack of the human mind on the Christ. It's never personal. So when you don't take it personally, you rise above it. God takes care.
And what does that mean, that it's not personal?
It's not people. It's not personalities.
Animal magnetism.
Thank you. Thank you. It's false beliefs. Maybe using people.
I was trying to find where this was from, but I think it's one of the early workers talked about the way to keep it impersonal is think of it as lie. That way you never think of lie as a person. So,
Good, thank you.
Mrs. Eddy says it. Evil is neither person, place, nor thing.
Martha Wilcox says, a problem is the wrong thought about a right thing.
I love that. That's great. So true. That turns the whole thing around.
There's a wrong vision of it, a wrong view. Oh.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you can prove it. How could it be otherwise if God is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent?
That's right. We can all prove it.
We can all prove it in our own experience. Every day, just like Daniel, day by day. Thank you, Tom.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Tom.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you
Wonderful.
all.
Thank you.